Hello everybody, this is Fun Police, and I am back with another deck tech. This is actually going to be the first deck tech that isn't one of my own made decks, but instead a deck I found online and thought was actually quite interesting. It is an archetype that we have not seen in quite a while, a US bolster list. And it is got some it felt quite powerful. I've only played a handful of games with it so far, but I had a lot of fun with it. I've almost always enjoyed it, and it definitely feels like... I see a lot of people complain that there's not a lot of mid-range, but this deck feels, I would say, like the perfect example of what mid-range is, at least in cards. You're playing big units, you're buffing them up, and then you're killing the opponent. You got a lot of mid-game cards, like look at that curve, a lot of 4 drops, good amount of 5 drops. We don't have a lot of 6 and 7 drops really, but it's still playing a lot slower than like a pure aggro deck. And before we go into the cards, I want to point out that this was Kolbasnik's deck for the Open 7th tournament. I'm sure I have butchered his or her name, but regardless, I just want to point out that that is who made this list and where I got it from. Beyond that, let's just quickly go over the cards, at least seeing how I think, as to why I think they're in the deck. So the first one is 32nd Infantry Regiment. This is super standard. Like, this is just a really good card, and you pretty much run this in a large majority of the US-based decks. It's very simple, but very effective in its usefulness. It's able to just draw more copies of itself, help smooth out curves, give you early units to play out and contest the board with, help you take the front line, and even just kind of thinning your deck out so you don't draw 1-drops in a later moment. It's overall a really good card. Then you have the 10th Engineer Battalion. So the 10th Engineer Battalion was I believe that this was run right before the nerf to it. So I think that this card may be a little bit less useful now. And maybe there is now room to remove it in favor of some other 1-credit card, or maybe a 2-credit card. But that is something that I will let people decide when they try this deck out. But at least for its purpose, it's able to give you that extra attack. We don't run a lot of artillery, so it's mainly going to sit on the board, we're playing it down, and then if the enemy doesn't remove it, it's going to act like a big SD-KFZ 222, just without the blitz. So, it's essentially a slower but more powerful version of that card, and just helps you put on the pressure. But again, now that it's a 1/1, I don't know if we want to really include it in this list, since it's a lot more vulnerable. Maybe there's another card that would end up performing better now. Then you have the 109th Combat Engineers. These are another kind of bread and butter, more aggressive US card. 1/2 Smokescreen is very hard to remove, and it offers the benefit of the unit getting +1 attack whenever they move into the front line. And since this deck is very much built, almost entirely built around taking the front line, the Combat Engineers is often going to get value, especially because many players are going to have a hard time dealing with your other threats, and then also finding the time to deal with a 2-health minion, at least until board clears come out. So the 109th can often come down turn 1, turn 2, and then stick around for several turns, just providing a small amount of boost. But that small boost can potentially snowball and give you that extra damage needed to close games out. It's a very solid 1-drop overall. Then we have PATTON. PATTON is another card that... This is a less common card in US aggro decks, or more aggressive ones. But in this deck, it can give you some potentially powerful plays. The big thing is that you could potentially save several credits in playing multiple units. I found, at least, that for the most part, you're looking to either use this like early on alongside the 32nd to play them all for free, or you are going to want to hold this until later in the game, you know, turn 8, turn 9, where you can use it to play down a couple units and then move them and attack with them and benefit from that blitz. I haven't made it work to good effect, to be honest. Like, there has been 1 or 2 times that it's gone off and been really effective, but a lot of the times it felt like I was just saving, like, 1 credit on a unit, because I got so many big units. So, maybe there's something to replace there, but, you know, again, this was something someone brought to a tournament, so, you know, but there's always room for refinement. Then you have patrols. Patrol is the main card to deal with guard. We do have a couple other ways, but this is the primary way. It also happens to help deal with destruction and smokescreen, alongside just being 2 credits for 2 damage, which is efficient removal. This gives patrol a bit of a nice utility overall, where you pretty much are always going to have a use for it against some deck, you know. If a deck is playing guards, you know, then obviously that works. If otherwise the deck may just be playing stuff with destruction effects, and if they don't have that, they might have smokescreen units, and if they don't have smokescreen, then at the very least they probably are running some small units, so patrol can just almost always get some value. But yeah, the main purpose here is to break through an enemy guard, you know. This is particularly good against something like Seaforth Regiment, the British 1-7 guard for 4 credits, as you can remove the guard and then it's just simply a 1-7 for them, or well, a 1-5 after the damage, and they're not going to have anything to really combo with it, which in turn makes, you know, patrol blanking a really strong guard. After that, you have the 5th Panzer Grenadier. The 5th Panzer Grenadier is... the big thing is the fact that it gives Fury, and this is kind of a combo card, namely alongside with Bolster the Ranks. You bolster the ranks with something and then give it Fury, and it's operating for free, it's even bigger, and it's attacking twice. It's not unreasonable for this to allow you to deal 12 or more damage, you know, all at once, which makes it a really effective tool overall. But that is also why you're not seeing all 4 copies of it. Besides, like, the kind of lack of space, the 5th Panzer Grenadier is not that effective early on. It's really only coming into its glory with the addition with bigger units alongside Bolster the Ranks. Then you have 2 Sudden Strike. This was the card that is a bit weird to me, but in the context of how the deck plays out after playing with it, it is actually a really nice and useful card. Sudden Strike gives you just that cheap, hard removal that can help you deal with, like, a buffed up, you know, 1 or 2 drop that is getting out of control, which can happen against certain decks, and as such, giving Sudden Strike it gives Sudden Strike a strong usefulness. It does overlap a bit with Patrol, but, you know, a split of the two, you know, gives you a lot of flexibility in your cheap removal. And because this deck can sometimes get off to a slow start, this amount of removal, I found, makes a decent amount of sense. At least if you're running into a lot of aggro. If you're running into a lot of control, Sudden Strike becomes less valuable. So might be worth replacing that with something a little bit more high impact. Moving on from that, you also have the Panzer 35. This is just like a bread and butter German card for any deck that's even somewhat aggressive. We have the perfect card. We have several cards like the 32nd Infantry or the 109th Combat Engineers that works incredibly well at activating this on curve. And with that addition, you also get a very effective just blitz tank that adds a bit of damage. You know, late game it can often be a little bit of a burst, but overall its biggest effect is that on curve blitz that allows you to apply a lot of pressure, take control of the front line, and just do a variety of things. Again, there's only 2 copies because of the room needed, because Germany is the ally. There's a bit of lack of room for everything, I assume, so this seems like it's just a place where, like, if we had more slots, we'd probably run the 3rd, but, you know, we're just out of slots and need it for other things. Moving on from that, we have the 99th Infantry Battalion. This is a I would say, like a foundational card for most US decks, that most US frontline decks. Being able to play an on-curve unit that then bounces an enemy unit to hand is very effective, all for 2 credits. Just really good. Cheap way to get through guards. You know, it allows you to often kill an enemy even if they have a massive guard in the way, as you just bounce that guard and then attack their HQ and kill them. It's very effective. Just really good. Then you have FLAMMPANZER, following in the tradition, or in the thing, or following up next, like from Sudden Strike. The FLAMMPANZER does a similar thing of being a anti-aggro tool. The FLAMMPANZER having its body and being... The big thing with FLAMMPANZER is that it has +2 operation cost. It has that 2 operation cost, which makes it a decent bolster target, and it also has like a decent stat line enough on its own. And as such, it's a little more valuable in slower matchups than something like Sudden Strike, as you can at least like use it as a threat alongside the removal. And we'll talk about how I might alter the deck or mess around with it, but I definitely think like a 3rd copy of this wouldn't hurt the deck. It's a very good card overall. You have the M18 HELLCAT. The HELLCAT is just a really effective 3-drop. It's got that aggressive stat line. It's got the blitz and a low operation cost. It makes it very easy to just get this going and quickly smacking the enemy HQ for 4 credits, or for 4 damage for 5 credits. Also has that text, deal double damage against tanks, which is okay, and very rarely it can sometimes come into effect, namely if there's like a big buffed up tank or something. But for the most part, you're mostly using this to smash the enemy face for damage. You also have the M4 Sherman. This is one of the payoffs for a US frontline deck. By being able to put out a strong or a decent body that also draws you 2 cards, it gives you a lot of mid-game sustainability and is your main card draw source throughout the game. It is very effective. It also is a good bolster target because it becomes a 6/6, and that makes it very effective at really messing with the enemy in the terms of killing them. And beyond that, you know, a big thing with the M4 Sherman, I should note, is that you don't always have to activate this on turn 4. Don't take the risk of losing the front line or leaving yourself vulnerable in order to try to turn this on turn 4. If it happens, great, that's awesome. But it's not important to get it, you know, right away. You can wait a turn and get a better board position and cement your lead, and then take the turn off to use the Sherman to redraw. And then on the flip side, you also have to be careful of not waiting too long, because if you wait too long to activate the Sherman and you lose control of the front line, then the Shermans become really bad. So there's a fine line, and it can take some time to get used to like when you should time your Shermans. Then you have the signature card of the deck, Bolster the Ranks. This was a very powerful card and is really the thing that enables this deck. Being able to give a unit often +2/+2 or +3/+3, and then also letting it operate for free for 4 credits is just great. For example, anything with any tank with a 2 operation cost, such as the Sherman or the FLAMMPANZER, essentially makes Bolster in a way free, because you would pay 2 credits to move it and 2 credits to attack with it. Bolster the Ranks, on the other hand, gives the unit additional stats, which is great, and then you operate for free, which essentially is saving you those 4 credits you would otherwise move it while giving you the extra stats. It's a very high tempo card and is one of the big power spikes in the mid game that really helps you to really put the pressure on the enemy. For the most part, anything with 2 operation cost is worthwhile to put with Bolster, and 3 operation cost is also really good. But moving on, there are a couple cards that are going to really stand out. But right before those, we have the BF 109E7 TROP. TROP, probably TROP, and this is a. If you've seen my Combined Arms video, this was, I think, a really strong card, and it makes a lot of sense that this is in a deck, at least a couple copies that are in. This deck runs almost exclusively a mix of infantry and tanks, so being able to activate this deployment effect is actually super easy, and a 4-credit 6/6 plane is really a really big threat. And it gives the deck a unique set of threat density. It gives the deck an even higher threat density, as you aren't relying on like sticking Shermans and bolster the ranks in order to win. You can sometimes just kill people with like a mixture of tanks and whatnot, and then using the BF 109 as a 6/6 thing that just kills the enemy. It's hard to remove and difficult to deal with. An overall very effective card in its capabilities. Then beyond those, we get into really the primary bolster targets, the M4A1 and the Panther G. The M4A1 is practically just there for the can't be targeted by enemy orders. That's the big text on it. It is also a well-statted tank, which is nice, but it is definitely the fact that the enemy can't use orders to deal with it that makes it such a primary bolster target. If you bolster it, it becomes a 6/7 that can't be targeted by enemy orders, making it very difficult to remove while being ridiculously big. It also has that text about discard, which we haven't seen a lot of discard, but it does have its uses on occasion, and it's always a nice little treat if the enemy is discard to just simply draw, 2 M4A1s and really just set it up so you have a very consistent and strong mid-game. And then on the other side, the Panther G. The Panther G is a 5-credit, very strong unit for 5 credits. Immune to order, protected from enemy orders. It's got that heavy armor, and it's a 6/5, making it hard to deal with. Very powerful in combat. And really, the big downside would be that 3 operation cost, making it expensive to move. Bolster, however, turns that from a downside into a massive upside, as all of a sudden this becomes a 9/8 with heavy armor 1 that can't be hit by orders. If you bolster it, it's operating for free, and it just goes nuts. That is one of the best bolster target within the deck, and it completely snowballs if the enemy is not prepared for it. They're going to need to bounce it or somehow kill it, as it'll eat through practically every guard within the game without breaking a sweat, alongside also really just messing the enemy up. You also have the 101st Airborne, who is more so just like a very solid 5-drop. That deployment effect can, help you snipe off a low health unit. The ambush can be annoying to deal with, and the blitz allows it to immediately take the front line. It's not really synergizing with much in the deck, but it is overall a solid 5-drop, and you can make good use of it. And then the final card, Strategic Bombing. Strategic Bombing is actually like a staple of most frontline based decks, as the enemy will almost always be only in their support line, making this very effective to help clear the board. But it also hits the enemy HQ, which is really important. That extra bit of damage can oftentimes be the difference between you killing them and them, being able to stabilize and recover and then push you back. It also loses the enemy a credit slot, which for this deck isn't the most impactful thing, because the enemy really doesn't, oftentimes, so the big thing with that is that sometimes it allows you to delay like crucial turns. For example, if you play this on turn 6, you can oftentimes like blank them for a turn into their carpet bombing, and that could potentially win you the game, but it's not the biggest thing in the world. And that's the list. So in the Mulligan, again, I've only played a couple games, so I'm not as well versed in this deck as the creator is, nor my other deck techs. But I would say that the Mulligan, essentially, you're looking for the 32nd Infantry Regiment, the 109th Combat Engineers, the Panzer 35T, and then probably the 99th. Those are the main things you're looking for when you start this game, or when you start doing this. If you know you're up against aggro, a sudden strike might be good, or flame panzers. And if you have a really good hand, like you have a 32nd infantry in hand and a Panzer 35, then I would also consider keeping an M4 Sherman there, as that can help you give you extra card draw once you set up the front line. But essentially the game plan is you're going to apply pressure with the enemy, you're going to play down your higher operation cost units, you're going to buff them with Bolster the Ranks and continue smacking the enemy down. You have a lot of ways to bounce and remove stuff, like 99th, the M18, FLAMMPANZER, Patrol, a lot of ways to strip the enemy. And then you're going to use the 5th Panzergrenadier on whatever you bolstered in order to double up the damage and kill the enemy. The deck is very resilient, and I found performs quite well against British control and Soviet value, surprisingly. Soviet value is not a fan of bolster on untargetable things. You would think that they'd be prepared for it, but they really aren't. They're taking a passive game, and a lot of their ways they would deal with units don't work. You know, in those mid-turns, like a bolstered Sherman can be such a headache for Soviet value. It's very easy. You know, their best answer is the hammer, which granted is powerful, but put it on an M4A1 or a Panther G, or even the BF109, and they're not dealing with those. You know, these three cards give Soviet value such a headache that really their only answer is to partisan them and then hope to like steal them with like Eurofactory, or just hope that they have a strong enough board they can fight back against it. But otherwise, I guess the only other thing left is that I think that I want to provide my thoughts on maybe how we could improve this deck list. So I think that overall, the sudden strikes are a bit unneeded. I think they take up space that they don't need to, being a tad slow, and they're definitely a bit more of an anti-aggro, but I'm much more interested in something like the 22nd Infantry, which is another card that cares about the front line and gives you even more card draw, which helps you sustain into the mid-game. So like I would try out those. I would also maybe consider finding room for more flame pan. Like, it's a bit hard. The German side is definitely a bit crunched, so if you don't like the 22nd, I could also see an argument for like another Flame Panzer. That's a very solid card still and works very well. I'd also probably put in another BF109 in that instance then, in order to help increase threat density. On the US side, it is a bit awkward. I don't know how to feel about the 10th Engineers. That's the card that stands out as the weirdest to me. And if I were to replace it, it's a bit hard. I guess like the 463rd could work, but that seems a little meh. Instead, I'd probably opt for something like the 507th PIR, as that is a very effective 2-drop that's going to be buffing all your infantry. And then I'd probably just look to run like maybe a utility card. In fact, I would even consider something like island hopping to be really good. This deck is looking to attack the enemy HQ. Why not get extra stats? However, it is notable that this does lower the capabilities of the deck in the early turns. You have a couple fewer 1-drops. So that could affect it. And that definitely is slowing the deck down a little bit. So we always got to be mindful of that. But I think that these two cards are really powerful, and they should offer strong utility that should make it a bit easier to use. Beyond that, there's not a whole lot, especially the more expensive. Probably I would, if you're looking for even more late game, stuff like the PBY Catalina, the P40 are both good options. You could also run the PB4Y2 Privateer. This is another option for a big, hard to deal with. That making the enemy pay more to target it with orders and even attack it makes this a great bolster target. So that could be another option. There's definitely a lot of room for, I think, experimentation. In fact, even We Can Do It actually could be effective. Being able to defend against a carpet could be highly effective. It also gives you some draw and a bit of healing, which might be just what the deck needs. Also, Seaborne Invasion is probably good as like a late game recovery option because it lets you take the front line, especially post buff. So I think there's a lot of experimentation that should be done with this archetype, as there's a lot of room for messing around with stuff and doing what you want. But for right now, we're going to leave the deck as it is, as it was played in the tournament. But I think it's worthwhile to... I'm definitely going to be messing around with this some more. And if you mess around with it, make sure to leave a comment about how did certain changes go. You know, did they work well for you, or is the base deck doing better? And beyond that, we are practically at the end of it. That is the deck tech. Hopefully you enjoy this. I've definitely enjoyed. It's definitely a fun deck, and now that I'm starting to get a lot of decks online, I have a lot of options to go over. So I'm excited. I got some plans for more videos, namely, again, more deck techs. I got done with the Britain budget last time, and now hopefully I'll be moving on to the third nation in the coming week or so. It'll depend. I'm still working on it. But hopefully, you know, this more consistent recording style is useful, and hopefully everybody's enjoying it. Regardless, I want to thank everybody that has watched this in its entirety, and have a good day.